I think there are two sets of questions here. One is pre-pandemic, and in general, why is African air connectivity, well, not up to the standard of other parts of the world? Even in developing countries, African air connectivity has been especially bad between neighboring countries and between regional areas. And the second part is, what has the COVID pandemic done to effects? And I'll answer the second part first, because it's actually pretty interesting, is that the recovery in Africa is actually tending to be stronger than it has been in other parts of the world. Relatively, it's all relative. There's still a very slow recovery. In fact, you're seeing some African countries which have taken a tact of looking more domestically and regionally to boost their travel due to closed borders, due to difficulties in accessing further away destinations. And, Ghana is an example of this. If you're looking at the statistics in comparing 2021 to 2019, there are two countries in the world which look like they will exceed their 2019 traffic totals domestically in 2021. One is China, which had a depressed traffic in 2019 anyway when COVID-19 first hit over there. And the second one is Ghana, which is on track to having approximately 20% growth in 2021 versus 2019. And I think that just shows that, a focus on maybe domestic tourism, inward-looking business and so forth, but the ability then to be able to focus on yourselves, your neighbors, and everything else is something that may be a silver lining that comes out of the pandemic. Now, going back to the first part of the question, which is why has Africa struggled in general? And I think, it may not be a popular view here with all the various government stakeholders, but I think the key reason for this is governments themselves. Governments in Africa have often viewed aviation as a soft touch, as a luxury product which can be easily tapped for additional taxation and so forth. If you are looking to fly between Accra and Lagos, for example, it is a 40-minute flight. It's served many times a day. And the airfares, just the airfare, which is what the airline sets and what the airline gets out of it, is about maybe $100 each way. But on top of that, you are going to pay $150 in taxes on a round trip. And those taxes go off to the governments, to the airport agencies, to the meteorological agencies, and basically everybody. The infrastructure requirements are being fed through ongoing user fees, often being used to pay debt service to external entities and so forth. The lack of access to capital for the private sector makes them overly reliant on governments, and when governments themselves are not entirely committed to developing the infrastructure, means that costs go up, and when costs go up, obviously volumes go down. And I think that is probably the key reason why Africa has stagnated in its aviation development. Certainly, there are pockets of Africa where this is not true. Ethiopian Airlines, is growing very strongly. But when you look at government involvement, and especially COVID has highlighted which of these home truths are coming home to roost. South African Airways, I think everyone knows the story there of how effectively COVID forced it into final failure. Kenya Airways requires renationalization. Rwanda is getting huge bailout. Air Senegal is getting huge bailouts. The government-run airlines have been exposed as not being nimble enough, and governments in general have been exposed that their investments have been more focused on running airlines rather than developing infrastructure and developing a conducive business environment for the private sector to come in, be more agile and be more innovative. And I think that is something that can really help boost African connectivity once the right policy frameworks are put in place.
So we're back to policy again. We're back to policymakers again. The onus falls on them. Do you think that the last 2 years we've seen any move forwards towards rethinking that?
I think we're still too early to judge that. I think, during the pandemic, governments
around the world... Or have we wasted 2 years? I mean...
No, I don't think it's been a waste at all. I think that a lot of governments around the world are going to see their finances stressed by the pandemic. And as a result, when they come out the other end of it, when they're having to stop spending on, vaccinations and healthcare and things as much as they are right now, they might realize that, connectivity and aviation in particular has been something that kept them alive during this time. If it wasn't for aviation, you wouldn't have vaccines being delivered to many of these countries. Landlocked countries would not have been able to trade with land borders closed and so forth. And I think that may actually occur to them that, you know what, maybe a bit more investment in aviation infrastructure and a bit more liberalization to allow the private sector to do something, because we can't afford to do it. African countries cannot continue throwing money at loss-making national airlines with basket cases for business cases. And I think, you know, I'm optimistic. I think that the countries which reach that realization, which start thinking that aviation can be a tool to generally boost the economy, to bring in tourists, to bring in business travelers, to generally, you know, help in developing your country, those countries will be the ones that that benefit from this pandemic in the long run. Well, I think African governments in particular have been disproportionately involved in their economies in general, not just in aviation or in tourism. And that means governments are always important stakeholders, even when private sector entities are concerned. I think it's important for governments to realize that their real role is to create an enabling environment for its constituents to innovate and thrive, and not to stifle them with overregulation and unsustainably subsidized competitors. If a government starts thinking about what can I do to improve the economy, to improve this sector in particular, then the government should take its hands off as much as possible and focus itself on primarily regulating and ensuring that things are safe to reopen and safe to develop.
I am totally in agreement with you, Sean.